Hey guys, I thought I'd talk over BWL a little bit, read my notes out to you. We're just going to watch Punkrat's video of it here. So that's the orb you mind control Razor Gore with, and basically a designated person is going to touch that even once you've already engaged Grethik, the controller here. He doesn't have to be dead, you can just grab it right away, and you want to, because you want to break those eggs as fast as possible. One of the abilities on Razor Gore when you MC him is break eggs. It doesn't matter exactly what order you break them in, there's going to be a bit of a delay on your timer for it. Not much. Your other abilities are you can sleep the Dragonkin, which can be helpful sometimes if people are getting overwhelmed, but in general it's not that high priority. The other thing you can do is you can fireball volley. This boss though, it's not great if he dies because the whole room's going to explode, if that's the case, so you don't want them on him all the time. Here he's sleeping one. Druids can sleep them too, and that's more important for them to do that, sort of using their best judgment. So the four corners strat is the one we used to do back in the day. I'd like to do just the 1 and 3 corners here. And we'll just have the stuff that's on the far side of the room, or rather, sorry, the 2 and 4 corners with the orb there. So the ones on the far side of the room are just going to run over anyway. Hunters can help sort of guide them over. Mages as well, you can counter spell if one of the caster mobs is sitting there casting. They're the highest priority of the caster orcs, and then you can see here there's one of the legionnaire orcs in the back. Those guys ain't nothing, you can disarm them, whatever. And they'll die pretty quick. Even a melee could grab one of those. The dragonkin take a little longer to kill. You can see one of them here with the arrow, with the hunter mark. So those have to be tanked and killed. So we're going to have probably our range up on the platform where the mind control thing is. Here you can see they're going to phase 3. So that's once all the eggs are broken. And you see the range and the healers are LOSing behind the pillar, right? And the reason for that is there's a fireball volley that he shoots out at everyone who's in line of sight. The melee up on them there, if they have free action potions, that'll help because there is like a war stomp type effect, like a stun AoE. And then as you can see, the tank is facing him away. So I'm just going to pause it for a sec here. So your main tank is going to take over the mind control for the last 3 egg breaks. And the reason for that is once we get into phase 3 here, when all the eggs are broken, basically that's going to give that tank permanent aggro. It doesn't matter how shitty his threat gear is or whatever. He's going to have permanent aggro, but just like on the last boss in Ubers, he's going to get conflagged occasionally, and so the off tank will have to take over, just like on General Drakaseth, right? So basically, the off tank's going to have to generate enough threat and take over in these phases where he's conflagged. Same thing as the fight. And to do that, it's really important the off tank has limited invulnerability potions, or sorry, not limited invulnerability, free action potions. Those will come later, the limited invuln. Anyway, that's basically it. This is not really a damage race in this phase of the fight at the end here, and it's not that long either. So basically, you know, if you're a melee and you're just not getting enough heals, etc., you can always pop out behind the left side over here by the mind control platform, out of line of sight from where the tank and the boss are, and just bandage up or whatever, or wait for the healers to get you. And that's pretty much it. Let's keep going with this. So yeah, the fireball volley in the phase 1 there, probably like around 4 or 6 egg breaks in, that's when you might consider using it just once probably to keep the numbers down. But again, it's dangerous. He can't get killed. We're going to have to be peeling the monsters off him over to the corners. We're going to kill them. And like I said, that's the mind control platform up on the top left there. And so our range are going to be up there sort of burning the ones down in this corner and then burning the ones down in the corner on our left here. And they can switch back and forth from either side, whereas the melee, there's going to be a group on this side and a group back on this side, just picking him up and killing him. Let's continue. And it's a continuous spawn of those guys until basically you break down all the eggs, right? So here's Veil Straz. Before we get to Veil Straz, we don't want anybody to run into this room prematurely while we're like assigning the loot and stuff to have a look, because you can run right in there. And what happens is there's goblins, some of them probably right down here by Veil, probably some of them further in the back or whatever. And over on the right hand side here, there's a ramp that leads up, not this one, but over in this corner. And that's where they're all going to run out to. They actually run away and disappear once they get up into the top part. We don't want to leave those guys alive because they can drop trash epics, they can drop elementium as well. So we're probably going to have a mage just blink right into this room here and arcane explode them. He just has to tag him. He has to hit these ones, probably run over here to the corner, the right side near corner, where the big ramp is, and just make sure none of them get out to that upper area up here, which is where we would proceed on to the suppression rooms, right, in the next boss. Okay, so Veil. Just get my notes up here. So you can set up the pole before tanking, or before starting the fight, and you start that by talking to him. Main tank's going to be over here, right by this little ramp. DPS, melee are going to be back here where most of them are standing already. Range and healers are going to be over here. And our off tanks are going to be on the far side, just a little up from where these melee are, but on the far side. Behind the front leg though, because Veil has a really fucking gnarly big cleave, alright? And he does start the fight at 30%, so once you get a third through him, that's execute range. But yeah, he has that big cleave, and I'll just back it up a sec here. And so if I'm the tank here, and our rogues are back here, and a couple of them are like up here, the cleave will not just hit in the front here for the tanks, but it'll hit these guys, and then it'll chain back to these guys too, and they're all going to die. So melee don't really move on this fight. So the other mechanic in this fight is you have infinite rage and energy and mana. It's just a really fast regen. It's not truly infinite, but might as well be. So something we can do on this fight is we can use improved lay on hands. I've been harassing the paladins to do it onto the tank, especially when we have like a fury prot tank on there. And they're going to be using armor potions as well to sort of buff up, because it's a really damaging fight. The other thing that's possible is our priests can be split up into each group. They're not all here, split up into each group, but it's something you can do. And basically they can just spam prayer of healing endlessly if they want to keep the fire raid damage down. There's basically a lot of damage all the time on this fight. It's a very short fight. So there's lots of other tricks you can possibly figure out based on having all these resources, right? The melee DPS, the warriors can basically chain cleave onto all their macros if they use macros for DPS, or just be hitting cleave all the time, as well as whatever your bloodthirst or whatever attacks you're using. And that's just because you're never going to not have enough rage to use that ability on cooldown, and cleave and heroic strike and all that, they don't miss. So basically you're getting around the problem of plus hit when you use those. Alright, so during this fight, mana users, casters and healers, can get the bomb. It's called Burning Adrenaline, but basically it's like the bomb on Baron Geddon, and you run over to the left side and blow up. We usually just have people go as far as they can down this way and blow up. You can go to the far side of the room, you can do whatever. But basically we like this left side because after, when you're setting up again, if somebody's late or whatever, they can still get rezzed. Mostly we're just going to run back anyway. It's a short run back into the room. Alright, so let's get the fight moving in here. So yeah, Burning Adrenaline. Every third Burning Adrenaline is going to hit the tanks. It's going to be the current target of Veil, which should be a tank, otherwise we're all dead anyway, right? So when that tank is about to die, what happens is the Burning Adrenaline really makes them way more vulnerable. They're probably going to die to melee. It will explode them, just like it explodes the mana users, and they'll blow up and damage everyone around them. So if people don't run out, then that nukes the whole raid here. But for the tanks, they're probably just going to die and not explode because Veil is hitting them like crazy, right? And so when that happens, your off tank's going to be watching. I better go back to that. Let's see. Yeah, Veil Strat. So yeah, the off tank's going to be watching from where he is over on this far side. He's going to be ready to jump up here and take over the dragon. Really, you can't let it face any other way for any amount of time because he'll cleave or he'll breath the raid and that'll kill him. So it's a fast transition, and what we need to make sure of is that nobody is above the next tank who's going to be picking up the dragon. Probably it'll end up being like Valam starting it. It's better to have the warriors go later because they can execute. But yeah, so probably Valam, then Exav, then a bunch of the other tanks like me and Kraxus and Red Sox and whoever else is coming up as well. Sort of the prot focused tanks. And it should be pretty equalizing. The tanks are going to be using Heroic Strike. You remember we talked about cleaving all the time because you have so much rage. But the tanks will probably be using Heroic Strike because it gives extra aggro. The DPS warriors can use Heroic Strike as well. It's technically better DPS, but again, we want to be careful, and you guys are crazy DPS, so gotta stay ahead. So yeah, when that tank gets burning adrenaline, they're not going to die instantly. The healers are going to spam them. They'll still stay up for a bit. Most likely, they're not going to blow up. They'll just die. The other one, as soon as the tank dies, will run up, pick the boss up, and that's really it. Just keeping it on the next tank always, and you kill the boss. It's a very fast fight. And so what we're going to do to make sure that people don't get above the tanks on threat, we'll probably just have somebody call it out. You might remember we've been doing that kind of on Ani as well in phase 1 when we just have somebody watching the threat meter and calling out to the raid when they see somebody above them on threat. And they just faint or vanish or whatever. So let's see the fight in action. There's really not much to look at on Veil. People who are going to blow up are just running out. Here's the Heroic Strike cleave thing. If you think you can get away with it, sure, but our DPSers are going to be pretty crazy on that. But like I say, that infinite amount of rage means doesn't matter what kind of tank you are, you're going to be able to get a fair amount of threat if you just spam, spam, spam. So it's going to skip over the suppression room trash. We'll talk about that when we do it. It's not that bad. We have the kind of power to do it. But you can see like there's these lizards and they're kill these broodlings, and they just spawn infinitely. They spawn up way faster than the lizards do, than the dragonkin do. Dragonkin are sleepable as well, by the way, by our druids. So anyway, you focus on the dragonkin and you don't kill the broodlings much. You just basically let them build up and then you kill them once the tanks decide it's time. Also, when you're in here getting ready to fight Broodlord, you can see him in the corner there. That's a good time for those little dragonkins to just smack the tanks and generate full rage on them so that they're ready to start this fight with a big advantage, right? Okay, so here's the setup for it. You got your range over here and your healers. Your rogues are running out to this spot, but otherwise they're sort of in here and backs to this wall. The tanks are backs to the other wall. And the off tanks are really important in this fight. They're going to be sort of sitting in probably behind him too, just to hit better, but then jumping out in front once they get aggro. There's no taunting on this fight. I didn't mention that. There's no taunting on Razorgore either, and there's no taunting on Veil either. There's no taunting on Neff, and there's no taunting on Cro-Magus. The Drakes you can taunt, and it's important. Anyway, let's keep going. Make sure and kill these things down. They harass the healers, right? But basically, yeah, everybody gets knocked back. That's why the melee are back to a wall here, so they don't get shot over here into the suppression room trash and pull and wipe. It happens a lot. And then the tanks also get their own specific knockback that halves their threat. So when that happens, it's likely the off tank will pick up at that point. And it's part of why, yeah, here's the abilities. Part of why we always call out sort of like, Valen tanking, cost tanking, Traxxas tanking, whatever, right? Because that helps the healers know who to heal. And this fight's all about healing, pretty much, and that threat stuff. Basically, this Mortal Strike is going to kill us as tanks. So when this goes up, we're going to call it out for the healers to know, because they might not always know. They're healing everybody as well, but mainly the tanks. So when this goes up, we want to have the priest shield us, at least one priest shield us. And we'll probably designate somebody to generally be the one that shields. And the other ones are just going to spam big heals, because it is a Mortal Strike. It'll reduce the amount that you get healed for. Cleave as well there. People forget this part of it, but it's the same as most bosses. If you're in front, you're going to get screwed up. And of course, if you're an off tank, and if you need more rage, as opposed to like putting out a lot of attacks and not missing, then you can jump in front and take a cleave. Just watch yourself, I guess, right? So here we are. That's the gate to the next area, by the way, that people are standing by and using the LOS spot for as melee. You can see that one's bandaging themselves. Y'all better bring some bandages to BWL, by the way. This usually isn't a problem these days, but it's really important. A lot of these fights, the healers are just busy and they can't get you melee guys. Or you casters sometimes. So here's Fire Maw. And here's where that gate was. And so we got Fire Maw up there. He's being tanked against, it looks like a gate back here, but it never opens. And so we have our range and some healers. On the other side, there's going to be our range and some healers over by the little table with the LOS spot. This spot everywhere behind here is safe. You're not going to get any debuffs from him when you're back here. The debuffs are basically like a big fire damage effect. On this fight, as well as all the other two Drakes and Nefarian, we need to wear the Onyxia Scale Cloak as tanks, but really the Rage should just wear it too. It won't be that much of a DPS or healing decrease or whatever. You can use your own judgment, but I would recommend to just wear it, because basically this fight's all about keeping this guy facing away from both these sides. And if he turns and burns, you're all going to die. Okay, so let's let it run. This is probably going to be a pretty long video. So basically, we got the one tank, probably the main tank here, off tank here, and the ability he puts up is Wing Buffet. When he Wing Buffets, it's going to have a cooldown bar coming up. The off tank's job is to watch that Wing Buffet and taunt the boss over to him when he does it. That keeps the main tank from losing threat. There's like a 50% threat drop when you get Wing Buffeted. All three of the Drakes have this ability, but here's where it actually matters on this one, more or less. Because it's pretty important that, you have to have a high fire resist tank on this guy, because he's going to stack up those debuffs. The tank can't really run out for them, but some of them will get resisted because of all that FR. Melee also use a lot of FR on this fight. If you want to stay in longer, then we recommend about 200 or so. But everybody has to run out every so often to those safe spots, just to let the debuffs fall off. There's no other way to get them off. They can't be dispelled or whatever. We're going to get into the easy bosses after this. This guy's pretty easy as well, other than the fact that there's a lot of damage, little coordination between the tanks. That's why it's important tanks talk to each other for these fights. As taunts do get resisted, you want to call out if your taunt gets resisted, because then the other tank can take over that role for you instead. With all these taunts being important, I mean, it doesn't hurt to have that improved taunt talent. It's pretty useful in 5-mans too. There's the debuff, Flame Buffet, some people say. And you just see people running out here. They watch their debuff, falls off completely. They go out, they get a few more stacks. You can pretty much use your judgment for the amount of stacks. I don't remember where it's totally deadly, but if you look at your bar, like flip-flopping up here, that should give you some idea of when it's time to die if you stay out any longer. So we'll probably go a little faster through Ebon Rock. That's more or less enough to watch that. Shadow of Ebon Rock, this debuff, this goes up on the main tank. The off tank taunts it off him. You're just going to take him in a corner. We probably use the corner over by the ramp. And, you know, one tank faces one wall, one tank faces the other wall. That's because of the breaths. We don't want the breath hitting both tanks. It's pointless. They still have their Nixie skill cloaks on. This is a fight where you could probably take your cloak off as a regular raider. But, I mean, also, why? I mean, it's not really a damage race. Okay, so Ebon Rock. That is all there is to it. Literally, they taught it off. He also has Wing Buffet, so, you know, there's 3 tanks that are going to be doing this most likely. And when one gets a taunt resist or whatever, the other one taunts it. And you just keep working it and build enough threat to stay ahead of the DPS. Not too hard. Flame Gore, even easier, right? So it still has Wing Buffet, but it doesn't really matter. And basically... Oh, and the reason we were taunting off on Ebon Rock is because that debuff basically heals him for big chunks. 1 or 2 heals going off is not going to matter. But, you know, you have to stay ahead of the healing. So, as long as your coordination is good with the tanks, you can get that fight. So here's Flame Gore. He has the Wing Buffet. Again, you just do the same thing. And as far as his actual ability, it's basically... He enrages and he does a blast wave. You might see him get 1 or 2 off in this fight. And so that'll hit all the melee, and it's not great. It hits the off tanks, etc. It's a lot of healing. And again, it says Frenzy Trank Shot, so hunters just trank them. And we need to make sure the hunters, like how the warriors are calling, or the tanks are calling out when they miss a taunt or whatever. If y'all call out when your Trank Shot is resisted, then the next hunter knows to like use theirs, right? So that's it. Chromagus. So Chromagus is a good place to use defensive gear. It's a longer fight. It's not really about a DPS race until once you get to 20%. There's a whole bunch of stuff on Chromagus, and we're going to watch it in the standard location here, as opposed to using the ramp. But the principles are basically the same. So, let's see here. The main Root Affliction that matters to know about is the bronze one. That's one nobody can remove with like Purge or Dispel or whatever. Here's the breast that he's listing out here. And those bronze ones can be dispelled with sand that you get from the goblins. We'll drop it. There's a limited supply. Hopefully you want a fair number in the first week if you're going to seriously take this guy down. But you just collect them over time and you sort of ration them out. Tanks, it's important to have them. Healers, it's important to have at least 1 or 2. And hunters, it's important because they're also tranking on this fight, right? He frenzies up every so often and you trank him. That's basically it. Same thing as on Flame Gore. These breaths, I'm glad they left these up. So the time lapse is the most important and significant breath. I'll try and let that fall off there so you can see it. But basically it reduces the tank's threat and reduces their health too. So it makes it a really dangerous time when that goes off. So we have an off tank who's going to build threat. And then he'll get out of sight, either here or further up where the melee is sometimes used. You can't see the melee from here, but they're around this corner. You can maybe see 1 or 2 of them poking out right there. So the off tank is going to generate threat and stay ahead of the healers at least, but hopefully get ahead of most of the melee, most of the range. You can see here that's like the safe zone line. So as long as the off tank can stay ahead of people, then it doesn't matter. When the main tank gets their threat reduced, it's just going to go to the off tank. And they'll run out of whatever their safe hiding spot is where they stayed out during the time-lapse breath. Everybody else, for the high DPSers and whatnot, you just jump out here where the tank is at when the breath timer is cooling down here, and when, you know, raid leaders will mention it. Every 30 seconds these breaths happen. So you get out there for the time-lapse breath, it hits you, and your threat is reduced as well as the tanks, right? Some people use the strat where everybody but everybody gets out and takes the time-lapse breath, and then the tank just keeps smacking it, and they get threat back. That's possible too, but we're going to have off tanks, so we might as well have them do their job, right? So, and also that way the healers don't have to deal with it. These other breaths, it doesn't really matter what they do, honestly. The frost breath makes it a tougher threat fight, obviously, because it reduces the attack speed of the tank. And normally the tank is the only one to take any of these other breaths. Then there's a dot one, there's a straight damage one, there's an armor reduction one. The armor reduction one, obviously, when you get that, it's pretty important to have stone shield pots, which is the consumable we really are just going to expect tanks to have, especially if you're Fury Prot, because you need that armor to stay alive on these fights. But they'll be available to get during the raids too. So Chromagus, once you hit 20%, you sort of stop a little bit before 20%, and that's to make sure it's not a bad breath, like say a time stop, or one of the more damaging ones. Then you push them down under 20%. Here's the afflictions. So anyway, to continue, once you push him down under 20%, he's going to enrage again, and basically that's just a hard healing phase and a high DPS phase. And one thing about Chromagus, he has elemental vulnerabilities. We'll talk about these in a sec. So elemental vulnerabilities are going to shift during the course of the fight. It could be Shadow, or Frost, or Fire, or Arcane, or Nature. I don't think there is a holy one. It's kind of funny if there was, but no, I don't think there is. Anyway, what they suggest is that you sort of test it every so often, and then your ranged people are going to call out if they know the vulnerability. Just so people know, when they are vulnerable and you're hitting them with like ranged frost bolts, you know, it's not going to be hitting for like 7k or whatever. It's going to be hitting for like 20k or something crazy like that. So just keep that in mind. It's going to be a lot of damage. You will pull threat as a range, and that is pretty much a wipe if that happens, but again, he's not tauntable. So basically you test it, and if it's early on, you don't go hard with the DPS. Just wait. Later on, ideally when he goes under 20%, you want a good vulnerability too, like Frost or Shadow. Anyway, the afflictions. What these do doesn't matter a whole lot, except for the bronze one, which stuns you, right? And the DPS are just not going to have Hourglass Sand till later on, really. So, you know, you'll be randomly getting stunned while you're out for the time-lapse breath, maybe. And then you're, like, stuck out there, and what if he, you know, cleaves you or something? So, that's kind of the scary part about getting these random stuns that happen. But everybody has to deal with them. Even the tanks are not just going to, like, purge that as soon as they get a stun. They're only going to do it when it's important, like during times when they have to, when the off tank has to run out and grab it, stuff like that. Healers will probably pop it if the tank's going down or whatever, or during the final phase when you got to nuke him and he's hitting harder. So yeah, slow and steady DPS for the first part. You can use the vulnerability once you're past like maybe 50% or something like that to sort of get him down faster. He is sort of a endurance race, and you want to make the best use of your stuff, and you want to pay attention to the threat meter. Here's somebody who got all the afflictions rather than running out and staying out of line of sight and waiting for people to purge those debuffs off him. So the Pally Cleanse is really powerful here. It removes 3 of those types of debuff, and then we got Decursing from mages, we got Decursing from druids. You can see these guys just spam dispel, right? That's what that fight is. It's a lot like those early fights in MC, like Luciferon and so on, where you decurse a lot. Alright, there's not a lot to look at, and I don't have a health bar in this video, unless it's here, I guess. We'll jump forward a bit. Again, things don't really change in that last phase, except for here's the vulnerability, right? And so yeah, it's great if we call it out, but if the boss mods do it too, sure. They say to test with like a rank 1 ability, like a rank 1 Frostbolt or whatever, or rank 1 missiles. And the reason for that is if you just start nuking with it and it's like 80% in the fight, and you found it, but you also grabbed the boss, most likely. So that's why they say to test with low ranks. Let's jump forward to Nefarian. I'm off my notes, actually. You can pretty much just talk about these fights. They're very interesting. So Nefarian, Phase 1, ad spawn by the doors. And there's a lot of complicated damage splitting you can do to make this most efficient, but the main thing is just you need to have enough DPS to do it. See how they repair it up here. So mages are generally going to want to AoE, and everybody else is generally going to want to assist train. So that's like when you use a macro that says /assist. And then it'll be like Lanigan, or it'll be like Local, or it'll be like one of the melee, most likely, who is the assist train master. So you would just go like /assist Local. And then he'll be constantly flipping over to whatever needs to get damaged next. It's better than doing like a bunch of symbols to focus your DPS and kill them. See, there's the little Draconids, and then there's the big guys. The chromatic guys are the big guys. Chromatic guys need a real tank, they hurt. But the little ones are relatively fine. You can tank them with melee. You can just spam AoE them or whatever. I'll just pause it a bit here. So the different colors, like with Chromagus has 2 types of breath, right? And then he has, other stuff. This part also has different stuff every week. So you might have blues or reds or whatever, right? So blues are the most important ones to assist train with the melee. Here's a caster side probably. You can see all the frost mages going hard there. So you assist train with melee and maybe like warlocks, hunters that don't really care about vulnerabilities. So blues are a top priority for that. The chromatic ones, again, they have tons of health as well as being tough, so they need a lot of damaging to take down. But yeah, blues are the first priority to assist train of the small Draconids, and then you got black, you assist train those too. The reds are the most important ones to AoE, so over off on the other side, whichever side has whichever, right? And then bronze and then green, you AoE those two. Alright, so when Nef lands, there's going to be a big shadow flame effect. You might see its big orange cloud that hits here. Actually, I think it already came down. So that's why you have your Oni-scale cloak on during this fight, is because he does that, and it will one-shot the raid otherwise. You're still going to take a lot of damage. So here, this shadow flame that's talking about is breath in the front, but the one that hits the whole area, that's just during the transition off of Phase 1. This is Phase 2. Okay, so let's talk about Phase 2. So range can LOS his fears. There's a broken pillar somewhere on this side, I think this one here. Range is mostly going to be over on this side, on Nefarian's left. His throne is back this way, right? Over there. That's his throne. You can see there's mages polymorphing here. This is one of the class calls. We'll talk about it. So anyway, healers and range, you guys can healers anyway, can probably get far enough over on this side away from him, it's like 32 or something away from him, that you can just ignore the fears. They won't hit you at that max range to heal your target. Just sort of walk back and forth till you find the max range. It's like on Shaz, right? How he'll arcane explode you if you're too close to him. Getting feared is also not the end of the world, but if you get feared up to the front and cleaved, then you're going to die. Okay, so class calls. Here are the class calls, and I'll say the solutions. Druids, you just sit there. You can go in DPS's cat form if you want, but I would just watch the fear meter. And it's questionable whether it's important or not, versus just being ready to heal once you come out of it. So hunters, their bows break. You bring other bows, and you can either macro them off and then let those ones get broken, or if you mess up and your rock or whatever gets broken, then hopefully your other bows you brought are pretty decent. I'd probably bring 2 extra bows. Mages polymorph, so you want to get out of line of sight. You saw there's probably those big non-broken columns. that you can get behind. You mainly just want to make sure you don't polymorph the tank, that would be bad, or polymorph the healers. So, if you tag a rogue or whatever, it's not going to be the end of the world. But yeah, there's those two big columns, and then there's also the throne. If you really want to, you can blink way back there. Mages have their ways, right? And hide behind the throne. But I would just use the column probably. Priests, they have the corrupted healing. When that happens, you're just going to nuke the tank with your heals. So you'd use a renew, you would use a shield. I would probably actually definitely shield once that happens. And you might have heard on our video, like Exo is calling out priest stop healing, right? So whenever there's a class call, lots of people do different things. There's a bunch of people getting feared. So when there's a class call, priests are going to stop healing for just a second and wait and see if it's a priest class call. It might not be, right? Same thing, hunters are probably going to hit their button and swap over to the other bow when that class call is incoming as well. Here's the meter for it, right? So 24 seconds till the class call happens. And the possible fear, just like Ani, she doesn't fear all the time, right? But she can every 30 seconds or so. So the other ones, Pallies. Here we are again. Good. So Pallies bop Nefarian. They Blessing of Protection him. He becomes invulnerable. And so that is problematic because there won't be any more damage on him or threat from the tank, right? So generally what we do is we ask Pallies to just cast a Judgment, like a Judgment of Light on Nefarian, and then priests can wand, mages and warlocks can wand, and that'll get them some health. Or Judgment of Wisdom will get them some mana back, right? Especially later in the fight. And in general, we just want to do a stop damage during the Paladin class call, especially if it's early, because the tank can't really produce any more threat when he can't damage it. So, but later on, it's not as important. You just continue lighter DPS and watch yourself on the meter. The Rogue class call, they get teleported. Let's pause it because this is getting kind of... Okay, good. Here's the spot. I can show where rogues are at. So rogues get teleported sort of front and center to Nefarian here, where the tank is at. The tank is going to take the boss. They're going to turn gradually and counterclockwise to about here. What happens then is you can see like he won't be able to cleave over here anymore. He won't be able to fire breath over here. He'll be doing it over here. And his tail is going to sweep through the raid here and end up coming out this side, so it won't tail whip these people around here. Not as important, right, as the cleave and the fire, but it's still annoying. So that's why we go all the way over to here. And if healers need to adjust, if they need to run up a bit to get heals on, they do it, right? So the rogues are here, they're ported and rooted. They can't just move out of it. It takes a second, and then they can move back to their regular spot, which is going to be sort of back left leg, like where the tank goes to during that part. And the tank comes back, just rotates back around here. Nefarian will just turn with you. Dragons are kind of nice like that. Alright, let's keep going. We're pretty much at the end, actually. Here over here, you see the Bone Zerg. So this is phase 3. When you hit 20%, you're going to wait for a good class call. Good is debatable, but basically, hunters, rogues, druids are all fine class calls. Warlocks too. If you just nuke down the Infernals, then it's good to go, right? And with our AoE, we can probably call Warlocks a good class call too. You just take a second, and then you start up DPSing the boss again. So anyway, once you do push them under 20%, these ads spawn from the corpses that you killed back here in phase 1. They all rush over to the raid and start kicking ass. It's ideal not to get them right here in the middle of all the healers, but so if you can, you kind of catch them back here a bit. This is where you're going to use, your Frost Novas if you're a mage, your Blizzard. You want one improved Blizzard mage for this because it really helps sort of slow them down to damage them enough. So ideally a bit off the healers over here, right? But yes, they're going to show you all the other stuff you do here, right? Use your sapper charges, use your bombs or whatever you got. Strathome Holy Water. If you don't have bombs, or just in general, it's a good way to AoE these guys. They're undead, they get hit by it. Bop, you would bop a mage, most likely, who's going off on his AoE with Arcane Power Up. And the Limited Invulnerability Potion. Again, that's good on this part for tanks who might just blow their Challenging Shout and then hit the Limited Invulnerability Potion and probably call out like, oh, I just blew my Challenging Shout. So the other tanks are not blowing Challenging Shout all over it as well. And then they'd be, invincible, but also holding all the mobs. So you can sort of stagger it like that. Of course, every warrior has challenging shout, not just tanks. So if you have that potion there, you can blow challenging, then blow that, and you're invincible. You have them all. But if that fails, if it's a little fudgy in how they get picked up, you still just want to use your challenging shout and sort of edge away from it a bit, let other people taunt other ones. And you don't need to worry about Nefarian. He's not going to get taunted. He is immune, right? By the way, Nefarian, you always have off tanks on Nefarian. It's not really for anything other than the fact that it is a threat sensitive fight. There's a lot going on. Sometimes your DPS are going to exceed the tanks, just how it goes. And since it's a longer fight too. So that's basically it. This part gets drastically easier the more engineers you have, the more sapper charges you have, etc. Right? And that's really all there is to Nefarian. We don't care about the Shaman Call. And thanks for listening. I hope this is helpful. My voice nearly gave out there, but hopefully it's interesting. A lot of this stuff is just gleaned from other videos, as well as just remembering the fights. Really looking forward to BWL. Hope to see you guys there.